Okay, well, I guess the first thing I want to do is just say thank you to everybody who comes out to see something like this on a cold November day, and especially for the incredible community support I've gotten through people in the community, but friends and my family. Just thank you. I really appreciate it. It means so much to me. So my book is Critical Air. I'm a registered nurse, and I guess this book was born out of kind of my family kind of bugging me to write down all of the adventures that I'd had when I was working in Alaska. I'll back up a little bit and say that my husband, who happens to be sitting here in the audience today, traveled a great deal. He went to lots of different countries in his career, and as I was getting toward the end of my career, I kind of thought, gee, I'd like to do something fun with my career. And the kids were kind of all out of the house by now, and so I started looking at what I could do, and I ended up taking a travel nurse position in Ketchikan, Alaska. I had never been to Alaska, and I thought, that sounds like a great place to start. So that's kind of where it started. I took a 13-week assignment in Ketchikan in the emergency room, and that's kind of where it all started. So I'll just go a picture of me. My book was dedicated to a dear friend and teacher in the area. Her name was Gwen Hutchins. She was just a phenomenal mentor for me. This is just a kind of a random picture of Alaska, but every place in Alaska was beautiful. And whether it was winter or summer, it didn't really matter. This was up in Fairbanks, right outside of the window where I did my in-dock. And it was a river that was going through the middle of town, and there was a moose sitting in the middle of the river. It's just beautiful. So I mentioned Ketchikan is where I started. And if you're in the medical field at all, usually any job, you take a new job and you walk in the first day, and usually you're kind of shuffled off into a back room with a bunch of paperwork to do and that sort of thing. But I walked into the emergency room in Ketchikan the first day, and it was totally empty. There was nobody there. And I looked around and I heard some commotion in a back area of the emergency room, so I made my way over there, and there was this guy that was splayed out on a table, and they were doing a full coat on him. And I kind of peeked around the corner and I said, hello, and the nurse from the other side of the room said, are you Gwen? I said, yeah. She said, welcome to Ketchikan. And she said, do you do blood gases? I said, sure, I can do blood gases, which is a medical procedure that usually you have to test out of to make so they know that you know what you're doing. So anyway, she said, get this girl a kit. And that's how I started in Alaska. It just was, I was thrown into it. And it kind of went that way every day. It was like working in downtown Chicago. There was something new and crazy every time I walked into that emergency room. And I think it's because it was like the first stop on the line when people were coming to go to Alaska. Ketchikan was like the first place that the ships could offload sick patients. So they just got some really sick people dumped on their ER, and a lot of them were quite elderly because Alaska was one of those places that they waited until they were almost dead before they got there. So when I got up there, it was a 13-week assignment, and Eddie decided to come up and visit, and we decided to take a little trip to a cabin that you had to use a float plane to get into. And so we hired a float plane, and we stayed at this little forest cabin. And some of the people that worked in the emergency said, be sure you take some extra food along, because they can't always get there to pick you up when you think you're going to be picked up. So this was that day, and the next day it had snowed. We ended up spending a couple of extra days there waiting for the gal to come and pick us up in the float plane. And fortunately, we had plenty of food, and we had to boil the water. We just got the water right out of the lake, but it was crystal clear, and it was just really kind of a cool situation. but we made it through. While I was there, they had the emergency room sponsored a March of Dimes run, and they asked if I would be willing to put together the run. I had some experience helping with charity runs and that sort of thing before, and so we put together a charity run for Peace Health, which was the hospital that I worked for. And I put quite a bit of work into it. We got duct tape out and we made Peace Health on our shirts. And the day of the race, it was pouring rain. It was just really awful out. And I thought, and nobody was showing up. And I thought, oh, what a waste of time. Well, about 30 seconds before the race was supposed to start, everybody showed up. Just bang, they were all there. And it was kind of interesting because I thought, well, that's smart. Why would you come early? And that's what I learned about Alaska, was that folks, they show up when they say they're going to show up, but they don't come a minute early because the weather's miserable. This is myself. A gal in the middle, is her name is Hima, and Linda, the other person, was the editor for my book, but cute story about Hima. When I started doing flight nursing, the pilots required that they know how much everybody weighed. And it was kind of embarrassing. They'd like kind of peek around the curtain and say, oh, how much does so-and-so weigh? And it was kind of an embarrassment. So we came up with a way of determining or getting that information across by Hima, my friend, was 100 pounds. And so we came up with the idea that if the person was 100 pounds, it'd be one Hima, or if they were 200, they'd be two Himas. So we were able to kind of convey that weight without embarrassing people. And the funny story was, many years later, when I was filling in Chinle, down in the Four Corners area of Arizona, I was on a reservation, and I overheard a pilot use the word Hima as a unit of weight. And I walked up and I said, did you just use the word Hima? And he looked down his nose at me like, it's a pilot thing. And I said, oh, okay. I thought it's not worth the time for me to explain it, and he probably wouldn't believe me anyway, but I thought it was funny. Years later, and several states away, they were still using the Hima unit of weight. So this is a picture I just included because they use container ships for a lot of their building. And so the two bottom area pieces here are just two container ships, and then they put the rest of the house on top of them. You'll see a lot of container buildings in Alaska. And the other thing I learned in Alaska is the taxation is always done by a drive-by. So a lot of the buildings are really ugly on the outside. And you walk in and they're really beautiful on the inside because they tax them based on what the exterior looks like. And so you'll see these, houses that just look awful, and they're actually pretty nice. So while I was working in the Ketchikan ER, I was approached by one of the doctors that worked there asking if I would be willing to set up a base out in Dutch Harbor, Alaska, which was way out in the Aleutian chain of islands. And I thought, well, wow, that sounds like a challenge. And so I said, well, I'll give you 6 months. And so I went into a lot of different in-doc training and training to help to learn different skills that I really didn't have. But I ended up going out to Dutch Harbor and helping them set up a base, and what was going to be 6 months ended up being over 10 years. So what I did was I would fly back and forth. I lived near Stoughton on our little farm, and I would go to O'Hare and board a commercial airline and fly to Alaska, and then we'd take our private plane out to Dutch Harbor, where I would be stationed for 2 and sometimes 3 weeks. So, and this is out in Dutch Harbor. I don't know if anybody remembers the show Deadliest Catch, but this is one of the ships or trawlers that was on that particular show. These are some of the eagles Dutch Harbor doesn't have any trees, and it's not because they're above the tree line in Alaska. It's more because of the wind, and nothing can take root in Alaska. And so they have all these eagles, and they will just kind of cluster everywhere. We used to call them dumpster eagles. They'd be lined around all the dumpsters. So, and on occasion, they'd get kind of nasty. They would nest up in the kind of the little cliffs along the roads, and they would come down and dive bomb you if you were walking by. So they'd have these signs to watch for the dive bombing eagles. I remember one time we had there was a guy that was walking his little Yorkie dog, and an eagle came and pierced its lung, and he brought it to the place where we were staying and asked if there was anything we could do for him. And I ended up calling a veterinarian in Anchorage, and he kind of walked me through how to put a needle into a dog's lung to reinflate it. So that was my first dog needling. But the little guy made it, and he did very well, actually. And the fisherman, we came home from a run one time, and the fisherman had left us a big bag of fish on the stairs of the apartment they were staying at. So we had a great crab meal that night. So they had wild horses out in Dutch Harbor, and these were some of the horses that were out in this bay called Summers Bay. They were they could hear the truck coming into the valley for miles away, and you could just see them come barreling down the hills towards you, and we'd bring carrots and stuff to them. So they were pretty cool. This is a picture of me picking blueberries out in Dutch Harbor. I remember the first year I was out there, I asked the pilots if they would be willing to go out and help me pick some blueberries, and I'd make jam for everybody. And they were all kind of crabby and grousing about it. And so, but I made a big batch of blueberry jam and sent jam home with everybody. And in the years that followed, they were asking, when are we going to go out and do blueberries again? So it became a tradition. And apparently, they're still doing blueberry jam out in Dutch Harbor. So it's made my day. We worked quite closely with the Coast Guard. There were times when the weather was just too bad and we couldn't fly in and out. And so the Coast Guard was able to fly in weather that we weren't necessarily able to fly in. And they, on one particular run, they were able to take myself and my partner out to a ship and lower us onto a trawler where there was a young woman that had gone into labor. She had hid her pregnancy from the ship captain and went into labor and got in trouble. And we ended up delivering the baby on the ship, and it was a tiny baby. It was only like 3 pounds. And we were able to intubate it and get lots of lines in it and stabilize it and get it back to Anchorage in very good shape. So I was always thankful for the Coast Guard and their ability to help us get where we needed to go or drop us off where we needed to be dropped off. So they were great people to work with. And an aside on that story, we had got the baby we'd intubated the baby, and we had a vent, which is a mechanical breathing machine that only went down to infant size. And the baby was so tiny that we didn't dare put it on the vent because we were afraid it was going to blow a lung. And so we bagged it with one thumb for 5 hours, which was like, and I just remember taking this tiny little baby into the NICU, or the neonatal intensive care unit. And I remember one of the nurses saying, "How come that baby isn't on a vent?" And I thought, you have no clue what we went through to get this child here. So it just kind of makes you want to step back every time you want to assume something and say, you don't know what that person has been through, was my lesson. Oh, this is out in Dutch Harbor, one of the World War II Goose. It's called a Goose, and it's an amphibious airplane, and it's one of the few left in the world, actually. And it's out in Dutch Harbor. It's able to land on water, and it's able to take off or land on either water or a runway. And kind of clunky-looking things. This is what we call deadheading back. We would take a patient to Anchorage from Dutch Harbor, and generally by the time a patient, we got a call and we got a patient into Anchorage, it was probably 8 hours worth of work. And so we would sleep in the plane on the way back, and the plane ride from Anchorage to Dutch Harbor was about 4 hours, so that gave us about 4 hours of sleep if we laid down immediately and just went to sleep. So that's what we called it, deadheading back. This is one of the volcanoes that's on the Aleutian chain of islands. As you go out there, we became kind of the eyes and the ears, I guess, for the U.S. Geological Service. The pilots would call in if they saw one of the volcanoes becoming particularly active, because they didn't want other pilots to be flying through their that sort of thing. So we would always report, that all of the mountains were kind of labeled like X32Y or whatever, and so they would call it in and say, hey, such and such mountain is looking kind of active. So we had other purposes too there. This is the runway at Dutch Harbor. As you can see, it's on the short side. There's water on 3 sides, and the other side has a mountain. So the pilots had to be really, really good to get in and out of there, and the weather was usually terrible. So they used to put us at the windows when we came in, because we would have to drop down below about 500 feet to be able to get under the cloud cover. And so you felt like you were about 3 inches off the water. And the pilots would have us looking out the windows and looking for what they called black holes. And what this was downspouts of wind that were at a velocity that it actually caused the plankton to spread out, and it caused what looked like a black hole in the water. And they would try to fly around those, because they could take you down if you went right through them. So our job was not only to take care of the patients, but also sometimes to look for black holes. I took this. This is just a picture of the sun on the shortest day of the year out there. And you can see this was like as high as it gets. It kind of just grazes the surface, and it never gets really bright. It just kind of stays misty looking. So this was actually a day when we could actually see the sun, and it was just kind of an interesting how it just sort of makes a little tiny graze across the horizon. This is another short runway. This was Sand Point. And this is a picture of us picking patients. We pick patients up every way possible. We had people bring patients out on dog sleds, or they'd bring them in on snow-goes. They called them snow-goes or snowmobiles. And so it was just a variety of ways that we would pick people up. This is the Russian Orthodox Church that is out in Dutch Harbor. And it's just a beautiful, lovely little church that is still quite active. The natives, or the Aleutian people that still live there, are very active in this church. And I became really good friends with one of the people that lives out there. And I was able to actually get into the church. It's a restricted church. And she made me an honorary Aleut. And that's how I was able to get into the church. And it was really quite beautiful. But they didn't allow any pictures to be taken on the inside of the church. This is one of the leftovers from World War II installations. They were kind of peppered all over the landscape out there. This is one place where the Japanese actually came onto American soil. And so if you're a World War II buff, it's all actually a really fascinating history to look at. And they talk about something called the Aleutian stare, and it was something that I witnessed when I brought people out there to work. People would get out there and they would get kind of a waxy, glazed over look in their eye. And what they determined it was is people couldn't handle being that far away from humanity. And after about 3 days, they would kind of go into a psychiatric stupor. And it actually changed the way that their skin kind of turned a waxy color, and they got a glaze in their eyes. And they would end up being like transported out, but they called it the Aleutian stare. And it just was kind of an interesting phenomenon, because I noticed when we would have people come out there who thought that they could work out there, and about 3 days in, they started to get weird. And then you just realize they're not going to make it out here. You have to have a particular type of personality, I think, to be able to handle being that far away from everything. So they had a little grocery store out there, kind of like like a pick and save, and they had a area where you could get hot food, and I thought maybe salad. And so we got back from a run, and the store was still open. I said, "Well, let's go and get some food from the grocery store." And I got there, and everything was fried. It was just hilarious. There was nothing that wasn't fried, and I thought, "Yeah, that makes sense, I guess." It has a longer shelf life that way. Everything out there was very expensive. I remember one of the pilots, I went to the grocery store one time and I asked the pilots if they needed anything, and Johnson said, "Hey, get me a bag of chips." I'm like, "Sure, I'll get you a bag of chips." And I get to the grocery store, and a little tiny bag of chips was $15. I was like, wow. But it made sense, because chips are hard to transport. You know, they take up a lot of space, and they are crushable. So I bought him his chips, and I threw them to him, and he had this smirk on his face. And I said, "You knew that, what you were doing to me, didn't you?" And he laughed. So, yeah. This is a lenticular cloud. Every once in a while, we go over a mountain, and we run into some really interesting cloud formations. And this is what's called a lenticular cloud formation. This is a picture of Cold Bay. And Cold Bay was one of the runways that was really long. And so if we got into trouble, and it was about an hour toward Anchorage from Dutch Harbor. So if we got into trouble or we had bad weather, this would be the airport that we would fly into. And this is where the first patient that I ever had when I started working in this type of work was delivered to the Quonset hut at the end of this runway. And his name was Slim, and he is, I was almost done with my indoc, and the call came that he had been out in Dutch Harbor and had gotten into a bar fight and had gotten thrown out of the bar, and it was snowing so badly that one of the taxi drivers accidentally ran over him. She couldn't see him, and she felt a thug or a thunk or whatever, and backed up and ran over him again. So this guy got picked up by the Coast Guard and brought to the Quonset hut at the end of this runway, and we flew in, and we were going to pick him up at the Quonset hut. And when I walked into the little tented area, he was on the table, and he was just in terrible shape. And again, it was like the dog. His lungs were just flailing back and forth, and I realized he needed to be not only intubated, but he needed a chest tube. And so this was the first time I'd ever put in a chest tube in a real person. I'd been in a nurse in ER and in critical care units for many, many years, and I had assisted with putting in chest tubes a lot, but I had never done it by myself in a little dirty Quonset hut. So I sat with a sat phone tucked into my shoulder and listened to the instructions that were kind of coming over the airwaves crackly. Okay, go 3 inches down now and make an incision. And I remember sitting there with my, needles and tubes and the phone tucked into my shoulder, and I'm like, what am I doing? But that was my first patient, and I will never forget him. And that sort of sealed the deal, though, because it was just such a fascinating thing to be able to, go in and actually make a difference in somebody's life and actually hopefully save people that maybe might not have been able to make it otherwise. Oh, this is another picture of some of the mountains going out toward the Aleutian Islands. You can see the back, although the picture's not really clear, but the back mountain, the top is blown off, and you can see the mountain in the forefront is working on it. It's got steam coming out. And so those are the things that we would call into the U.S. Geological Service and tell them that things were happening out there. And this is a picture of so I was working in Alaska, and I would work there 2 weeks on, and then I would fly home, and I would be home for 2 weeks. And to be able to do what I was doing, I had to get a bunch of certifications to be able to fly people at elevation. And I started getting phone calls from insurance companies asking if I would be willing to repatriate people from around the world. And so that's how I ended up getting all over the world. I would get a call, and they would say, hey, I've got a patient in, Oman or wherever. And I would say, oh, okay, well, and they would give me sometimes very little time to get ready. And so Eddie'd be driving me to the airport, and I had no idea where I was going. And I would go from desk to desk to see. They'd say, just head to the airport, and we'll have tickets for you by the time you get there. And so the ticket agents kind of got so they knew me, because I would walk up usually first to Delta and say, hey, have anything for me? No, not yet today. So, and then I'd go to United, and it was kind of funny. But anyway, this particular time, I thought I was going to Amman. And I got to the ticket counter, and they said, oh, no, you're going to Oman. And I was like, what? And you can see by the little dot there that I ended up going into Salalah, Oman, and it's just like a walking distance to Yemen. And so it wasn't a real stable area to be at that time anyway. So they put me up at a nice hotel. It was a 5-star hotel for the area. And you can see that's the picture of the hotel facing that way. And this is the picture facing the other way. You can see the camels on the beach, and out in the ocean there are ships. Those are fighter ships. So, and they said, do not go down by the beach, because what was happening was people were flying into Salalah and walking the beach to get to Yemen. And so they were patrolling the beach to keep the terrorists from getting into Yemen. And so I really, really wanted to put my feet in the water, because it was just one of those little, we had an ongoing thing with, my husband and I had an ongoing little thing where we were trying to see who could see the most oceans. So I timed the helicopters going by, and I determined that they were going by about every 10 to 15 minutes, and if I dropped everything and ran down there, I could get down there and back in that time. So I ran down there, and I put my foot in the ocean and ran back, and I didn't get mowed down. So This is the patient that I picked up in Kathmandu. She was just a lovely woman. She was an architect, and she had gone there to help with the cleanup. And she'd gotten very, very sick. And she, by the way, she's given me permission to talk about her and to use her picture. But they had, she had gotten an ovarian cyst, and she'd had surgery, and it didn't go well, and she ended up almost dying there. And this is one of the people that I went and repatriated back to the Boston area. So these are just some pictures of Nepal, and you can see the tuk-tuks, and this was the area in Nepal where most of the grocery stores were, and the little shops, they're about a quarter of the size of this room, and everything is really quite compact. And each shopkeeper is responsible for keeping the roadway in front of their shop clean. So that's their system of that's their system of keeping things kept up in the Kathmandu proper. And again, some more colorful pictures of some of the tuk-tuks. And this was their electrical grid. Every street corner, you would look up and you would see this mass of wires. And somebody asked if that was because of the earthquake that had happened, and I said no. I think that's just the way they always had them, because every street corner had a mass of wires like that. And this is a picture of a shop that wasn't owned, and you can see nobody cleans in front of it. And they had rolling blackouts there. So the hotel I was staying at only had electricity for about 4 hours a day. So you had to get down to get your meals during the time when they had electricity. And so I went down to get a meal, and everything on the menu was peanuts. You could have them steamed, you could have them fried, you could have them mixed with a few vegetables, but it was entirely peanuts. And my thought was, oh my God, if you had a peanut allergy, this would not be a place to go. But they were actually good peanuts. These were steamed peanuts, and they were really good. These are some random pictures. This is up in Juneau. It's a glacier, the Mendenhall Glacier. And this is down in the Arizona area. It's a meteor. And every once in a while, the pilots would really try to point out things when they were going over something that was really cool. They'd say, hey, guys should check this meteor out. So, I went to pick up a patient in Gibraltar. And this is the Rock of Gibraltar, and it looks just like the old ads for Gibraltar for insurance. Gibraltar is actually a city-state, so it's just the city is the entire country, and it's a very small city, actually. And I don't know if you can catch this, but the runway goes right through the middle of town. So they have to block off the main drag or the main road when planes come and go. So it's just an interesting, they have their runway right in the middle of town. And this was a picture, or a map, I guess, after deciding that I was going to retire. My husband and I had a lot of frequent flyer miles built up, and we decided that we were going to go someplace together, but it had to be someplace that neither of us had ever been. And so we ended up going to Mongolia. And it was just really a cool adventure. We ended up renting a car and an interpreter, and we actually stayed with the Mongolian people in their yurts, or they call them gurs, and we ate what they ate, and it was just a fascinating trip. Again, this would not be a place that if you needed a bathroom, or a shower every night or running water, probably not the place to go. It was, they would have a hole in the ground with 2 pieces of wood that you stood on to go to the bathroom, and that was about it. And no shelters. But the people were wonderful. The people were beautiful. This is a mom and her daughter. She's milking a yak. And this is a picture of one of the families that we stayed with. And this is a picture of one of the yurts or the gurs that they live in. And they pack those up twice a year and move them around. And this is a picture of my lovely family. Just a variety of things that I was able to do in my career. That's it. Questions? Yeah, yeah.
How many years did you do all this?
Well, I worked in Alaska for about 10 years, but totally I continued to do some international repatriation for another 5 years, so about 15 years, really. Thank you so much, everybody, for coming and supporting me. Thank you.